All right. So good afternoon, Apcu. Welcome, Apcu members, and especially our esteemed speakers and also our Apcu officers to today's forum. It's the November forum of the Association for Philippines-China Understanding, and it is my pleasure to moderate. I'm Hubert Chua, and today we have two speakers. Of course, both of them are Apcu laureates. Association for Philippine-China Understanding 2022 laureates. Uh, Both of them are, of course, major contributors. One is a columnist, the other is a professor, and they're both very excellent resource persons for today's topic, South China Sea behind the scenes. So with that, of course, we are very excited to have both of them share their wisdom and understanding so that we can be enlightened. But before that, let's start with the invocation. So to begin, let's all remember in the most holy presence of the Lord, dear Heavenly Father, we just like to pray and thank you for this day and pray, Lord, for continued peace and understanding between Philippines and China and along the world. We pray for peace. And we pray, Lord, that you can grant Apcu members the wisdom and, of course, the ability to help foster understanding between two peoples, two cultures. We understand that the world is very full of conflict right now, but we hope, we pray that you can grant us peace and that Apcu can continue to flourish and provide very important role in bridging the gap between the two nations. With this, we pray for the success of today's event and for the future events of Apcu. This we ask in the mighty name of Jesus we pray. Amen. So with this, we would like to invite President Jeffrey Nam to give his opening remarks. Press Jeffrey.
Thank you, Hubert. Fellow officers and members of the Association for Philippines-China Understanding, or Appcu. To our distinguished resource speakers, Mr. Rod Kapunan and Professor Celso Cainglet, to our media friends, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, a pleasant afternoon to all. Welcome to our latest Appcu Forum this month, and we're proud to headline our two distinguished 2022 APPCU laureates this afternoon. South China Sea is one of the most in-demand waterways in the world. It is a disputed area involving multiple countries like China, Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, the Philippines, Taiwan, with multiple claims. The waters of South China Sea are indeed the object of contention among the claimant states with overlapping territorial and maritime sovereignty and sovereign rights claims. Likewise, the South China Sea is also considered important for strategic, security reasons, commercial shipping, and potentially hydrocarbons. There are also bilateral and trilateral disputes among ASEAN members over maritime boundary demarcation. But reality confronts us that the dispute is still unresolved and will most likely not be resolved anytime soon. It is also apparent that the South China Sea dispute is sensitive and complicated. There is no easy solution to this dispute. Again, it can't be resolved overnight. Thus, the dispute should be appropriately managed. The differences over the contested waters of the South China Sea should be managed in good faith and with lots of goodwill among the concerned parties. Instead of treating the South China Sea as a source of potential conflicts, it can be viewed as a zone of peace cooperation, joint development, and management of resources. Most importantly, constructive relations between and among the claimant states, coupled with multilateralism within the ambit of international laws and the ASEAN, and pushing for the China-ASEAN Code of Conduct for the South China Sea are also essential considerations for the resolution of this dispute. Equally important should be given attention and consideration are multilateral and bilateral negotiations among the claimant countries on joint development and cooperation on fishery management, marine environmental cooperation, and oil and gas development in the contested South China Sea, among others. Aside from the fact that these joint cooperative activities will yield tangible benefits for the people of the claimant states, these activities build trust, understanding, and confidence between and among the claimant states and their people. Indeed, though the current situation in the South China Sea is far from ideal, it is relatively peaceful and the potential for economic success and prosperity is enormous. Thus, all of us must work and contribute to maintain and transform the South China Sea as a haven of peace, security, and a source of economic prosperity rather than conflict. On this note, on behalf of Apcu, I would like to congratulate in advance and extend my sincere gratitude to our two resource speakers for sharing their ideas, knowledge, and experience about the South China Sea. I am sure that each of us will learn a lot from our excellent speakers this afternoon. Again, thank you and have a pleasant afternoon, everyone.
Thank you, President Jeffrey Nang. A couple of reminders. First, as our speakers share their thoughts on the subject, those of us who have questions can post their questions on the chat room. Our chat, of course, is in the Zoom, application. Please post your questions on the chat room so that I can ask them as the moderator. Or please message me if you might want to ask some questions yourself to our speakers. The other is we'd like to thank our partner, Manila Times, and for always being there and for always being able to cover us in the media. And we would like to thank the Manila Times for always providing a voice for Philippine-China understanding. That said, let's move on to the introduction of our first speaker.
Columnist writer Rodrigo Rod Kapunan is the voice behind the popular Backbencher column in the Manila Standard today. He is also a regular contributor to the China Daily Global Edition and the Global Times, both internationally circulated newspapers. Academically speaking, Rod earned his undergraduate degree course in political science and a Bachelor of Laws from the University of the East. Rod is also an active member of the Warren Society Association of the Philippines Incorporated and the Philippines-China Friendship Club. Having a background in politics and the law, it is not difficult to see where his interests and leanings toward various political issues might have been rooted. Rod has been vocal about his views on many issues and continuously confront Philippine politics and government as a writer and political analyst. As a columnist, he has written and published relevant articles and pieces that offered alternative views towards understanding the Philippine culture and economy. He has also written and delivered talks on the disputed South China Sea issue, topics involving Philippines and China relations and China's foreign policies, culture, and shared community principles enunciated by Chinese President Xi Jinping as a guest speaker and resource person. To name a few, he was a resource speaker at a Jinan University in Guangzhou, China in 2018, where he talked about the current development of domestic policies in the Philippines and its implication to the Sino-Philippine relation. He was also a resource speaker at the South China Sea BOO Sub-Forum for Asia in 2019, held in Hainan, China. He also delved into opportunities available to the Philippines and for further cooperation at the new stage of the 21st century Maritime Silk Road. Rod is keen on the support and aid extended by China to the Philippines as an Asian neighbor. Contrary to the mindset that has been blinded many Filipinos today, he sees the Philippines-China cooperation as an opportunity more than a threat to the country's economy and security. It is in this light and the reason that the award for promoting Philippines-China understanding, or Apcu, recognizes the efforts and contributions made by Rod Kapunan as a writer, columnist, and political analyst in forging better relations with China, and by acknowledging the important role of China in aiding the development of the Philippine economy.
Can I start now?
Yes, Mr. Kapunan, you can start.
Well, actually, I prepared a rather long message about this South China Sea issue. But let me read this. Our continuing dispute with China and the South China Sea remains confusing as ever. The issue lingers on as to this day that has become an unresolved issue that the succeeding Bongbong presidency has lost track to what has become of it. The issue will remain unresolved and possibly will continue because the Philippines, as principal claimant to the disputed waters called South China Sea, was the first to claim the area, the body of water traversing north in Japan, in the Sea of Japan, passing through the Straits of Taiwan until it reached the narrow pass of Straits of Boloca in the Indian Ocean. Although the body of water stretches several disputed islands from the Kuriles in the north of Japan, and its claim of this territory is taken by Russia to the island of Shikaku, or Dayo Island in the Sea of Japan. The dispute over certain islands stretches all the way to the South China Sea, principally because of the boundary that separates the Philippines east towards China and Vietnam, it being the only one demarcated by a document otherwise known as the Treaty of Paris in 1898. Well, let me tell you, our complaint, the Philippines was the first to file a case against China in the so-called Permanent Arbitration Court in 2014. But the problem with our case is that we never presented any evidence in support of our claim. For instance, we could have presented the Treaty of Paris as a point of reference, not as evidence, because of course China did not recognize the Permanent Arbitration Court. So is the Philippines. But we could have presented our claim in the South China Sea as a point of reference, because the Treaty of Paris, it states the specific demarcations, the degrees, the latitude, the longitude that separates the Philippines and the islands from the Republic of the Philippines, particularly Spratly Islands, and that forms the so-called Red Bank. We could have presented that, although the Philippines is not signatory to that treaty signed by Spain and the United States in 1898, as successor in interest, our position was ripened to that of ownership after the country was granted independence in 1946. Interestingly, the Treaty of Paris was not submitted by the Philippines when it filed the case and use it as our best evidence of ownership that the portion of the archipelago now being disputed by other countries. Maybe we can speculate that behind the decision to file a case against China will appear that originally the US was a party to the treaty. Second, no matter what inquiry was conducted in that treaty, the US was the original signatory and party to that treaty. Any attempt to amend the boundaries is no longer possible as it was signed more than a century ago. Third, the presence of a treaty will expose that we have no basis for our claim against China. Fourth, the US, in an attempt to come to the rescue of the Philippines, has no basis except for the military basis it signed with this country. I'm particularly interested of the fact that the Philippines really has no basis to side with the Philippines on our claim on the South China Sea. First, it abandoned the US bases in the Philippines way back in 1991. And after abandoning that, there was even a point that before the United States left the Philippines in 1986, the US was using Scarborough Shoal as a gunnery range for aircraft and US naval ships from Subic and Clark. They could have maintained that if they wanted to at least as a gesture that Scarborough Shoal belongs to the Philippines. But instead, the United States completely abandoned the Philippines, giving rights to China to claim that area. Of course, I'm not saying that China simply grabbed that portion of Scarborough Shoal. Scarborough Shoal is outside our territory, the so-called exclusive economic zone. The exclusive economic zone will give us only up to 200 square miles, nautical miles, from some Botolan and Zambales to that island. So beyond that, it cannot be considered part of the exclusive economic zone. And yet the United States never asserted its position as what we call that as a caretaker. How do you call that? Not really a caretaker. Be a successor in interest, being entrusted to take care of that shoal for its gunnery practices from Subic and Clark. Ginawa nila yun. And now, so Article 2 of the Treaty of Paris states that the United States paid the sum of $20 million within 3 months after the exchange of the ratification of the treaty. Many of us are puzzled why the Philippine panel did not submit to the Philippine Permanent Court the most important document. Effectively, our position to opt out of the voluntary arbitration procedure now appears to be justified. China may have its own interest, but it opted out of the voluntary arbitration with the Philippines. The Philippines could have been placed in an embarrassing position. China may have a contrary reason to claim South China Sea should be presented the Treaty of Paris, but indicated we have no basis to our claim in the area. I do not understand why we never presented the Treaty of Paris. That is my main argument here. If you are a claimant, the Philippines should have presented the Treaty of Paris, not as evidence, because as I said, China never recognized that portion of the territory. They never recognized that. And they never recognized the Permanent Arbitration Court. So when we tried to hide that portion from the body, in effect, we are trying to hide something because that could have clarified the issue, like asking, why are you interested in claiming this? What is the basis of your claim? They could have asked that question, but instead, the Philippines did not submit nor mention that portion of the agreement, that we have an agreement. We were told that the so-called Murillo paintings that was done about for 3 centuries ago, and yet we that prefers to present the Treaty of Paris, because the Treaty of Paris is the most recent. It's the most recent document we could have present as the basis of our claim, and yet we tried to ignore that. And then later, the Treaty of Paris itself was amended by the Washington Agreement, by the Treaty of Washington in 2000, in 1900, which is to grant an international passageway in the Cebu Island. It was, I suspect, mainly suspect, that it was worked out by the British to give way to British warship that then owned Malaysia, and on their way for ships going to Australia from the South China Sea to Australia. The United States paid $100,000 just to secure that to secure the passageway. Now, the most important amendment also to the Treaty of Paris was the so-called United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS. UNCLOS was ratified in 1984 through a convention by members of the United Nations. The importance of the UNCLOS is that it gave the Philippines a 200-mile nautical limit. That is a distance giving it almost 200 miles from the baseline to the baseline. And then the unusual thing about it is that it also instead, although it gave us the 200-mile limit, instead it exposed the truth that many of those islands we claim as ours were located outside the treaty. Many of them were, like for instance, the Spratly Islands, Scarborough Islands, and Kalayaan Islands. I mean, to be sure, Kalayaan Islands is a group of islands which is close to the Philippines. We can claim it as part of our territorial waters because I think many of these islands close to is less than 22 kilometers from Palawan. And yet, I think we never claimed that, we never insisted, we never manifested our ownership of that area. That's why it became, because it indicates that the Treaty of Paris indicate that the Kalayaan group of islands outside of the demarcated boundary in the treaty. So nasa labas ng treaty nila, kaya hindi natin may claim yan. Bagamat napakalapit sa Pilipinas yan. Ngayon, ang isa naman na kiniklaim natin, yung Scarborough Shoal. Sinasabi natin, pero ang Scarborough Shoal ay napakalayo. About 230 kilometers from Botolan, Zambales. Napakalayo. Parehong so makikita mo ang boundary demarcation ng Pilipinas. Either pagka-Treaty of Paris sa pagsukatin mo, mapapansin mo na napakalapit sa Pilipinas na nawawala ang territorial waters natin. Ang territorial waters natin, kung susumahin mo, malabas lang ng 12 kilometers ang binibigay sa Pilipinas. 12 kilometers standard yan. Kulang-kulang po sa 12 kilometers ang napupunta sa atin. Kasi masyadong malapit sa Pilipinas yan. ginigipit sa Pilipinas ang teritoryo, na wala ang territorial waters natin. So, hindi natin masabi na talagang atin yan. Kasi pag sinabi ng halimbawa ng China o ng Vietnam, paano mo sasabihin siya yan? Samantalang ang Christian Parish magsasabi na wala sa iyo yan. Ganun din eh. Kaya hindi tayo makibo dyan. Yun ang isang naging problema ng Pilipinas. Ganun din ang nangyari sa Scarborough Shoal. Tatanda mo yung Philippine ambassador nga natin na yung Chinese ambassador to the Philippines na babae. She was in Hainan. Nagkataon na nagsalita siya doon. Sinabi nga niya sa amin, paano mo sasabihin sa inyo yan? Ipinakita nga niya yung mapa. Ito, nagdala ako ng mapa. Ang mapa ng Pilipinas, nandun ng Philippine Archipelago. Nakakatawa yun. Sabi niya, itong mapa ito, gawa ito ng Pilipino, ng National Bookstore nga, nakita ko. Sabi niya, ginawa ninyo ito. Nag-i-indicate doon na yung Scarborough Shoal, wala sa inyo. Pinakita niya yun. Paano nangyari yan? Nasa labas yan ng niyo. Kasi ang nag-i-indicate lamang, pag susumahin mo, yung boundary natin, ang babasahin natin, yung tinatawag din yung Paris, makikita mo lang yung discrepancy. Yung nasa labas talaga ng Pilipinas yan. Ngayon, dahil dyan, nagkaroon tayo ng agreement sa China noong 2018. Ang pirmado natatanda ko si Secretary Lacsin, si Foreign Minister Wang Yi ng China. Ang inayos doon, ang inayos doon sa agreement na yon ay ang iniquity na pinirmahan ng nakaraang administrasyon. Ang iniquity ng nakaraang administrasyon, pumirma tayo ng tinatawag ng agreement with Shell and Chevron na binibigyan ang itong dalawang foreign oil companies ng 90%, 90% ng kinikita ng oil company sa lugar na yon. Lumalabas pag hati-hatiin mo yan, 40% ang dalawa, di bali 90 yun. Ang natitira lamang 10% para sa Pilipinas. At ang Pilipinas naman ay nagre-represent ng PNOC, Philippine National Oil Company. Ang ano niya, ang sabi ng agreement, ayusin natin yan sa 60-40. In accordance to the Constitution. In accordance sa Constitution ninyo. Constitution kasi natin nagsasabi na 60-40 sa atin at ang remaining na 40% sa dayuhan. Ang nangyari, anong nangyari, di pa po napabor sa Pilipinas yun. Kaya sila ngayon halos sila ngayon na Pilipinas. Pero, isa na mapabuti, may nangyari doon habang supposedly i-implement pa nga yung agreement na yun, may nangyari doon. Kasi ang pirmahan na agreement, oil agreement between the Philippines and China ay government-to-government basis. Dapat ang pumipirma doon ang PNOC at ang China National Oil and Overseas Corporation, CNOOC. Yun sila dapat ang pumipirmahan doon. Pero hindi ganun na nangyari. Pagkapirmahan doon, ang PNOC namigay ng service contract sa mga oil company na pag-aari ng ibang pribado, katulad ng pag-aari ni Pangilinan, pag-aari ni Rosario. Ipinamigay niya, pag-aari sa binigyan niya. Meron pa silang foreign oil company, pinigyan pa. Pinamudbud yung lugar-lugar, ang tawag doon pinamigay na service contract. Yung service contract na napag sa mga pribadong oil companies. Parang, ang tingin siguro ng China sa atin, parang mukhang iniisahan sila. Ang akala ko nag-uusap tayo sa oil na ito, ginawa mo, yung pimimigay mo sa amin, paghahatian natin na 60-40, ibang portion na, pinamigay mo pala sa ibang kumpanya. Kaya medyo nagka-problema, hindi maintindihan yan. Kaya hanggang maangal tayo na hindi raw ini-implement ng China. I think so. Hindi ko naman nakikita yun na bakit hindi nila ini-implement yan. In fact nga, sinabi ni Bumuk, tutuloy daw niya. Talaga naman, dapat ituloy kasi walang basis ang basis. Kung may kasalanan ng Pilipinas, kung may kasalanan nun tayo. Ang usapan doon ay government to government. Napunta government to private, napunta sa pribado yan. Parang ipinasa ng gobyerno sa pribadong kumpanya na sa ngayon, nagka-question yan. Yun ang dahilan kung bakit ngayon, hanggang ngayon, kini-question yan. Dahil dyan, hindi malaman ngayon ng China kung itutuloy pa nila yan. Kasi kinakausap nila, hindi ma-clarify ni Bongbong. Pero kung itutuloy pa ni Bongbong yan, tanong lang dyan, anong pag-uusapan nila? Samantalang maganda na yung dati. Inayos na halos yan ng China. China mismo umayos na yan. Sige, para saan natin yan? Gawin natin ng 60-40 yan. Bibigay natin sa iyo. Alam mo, hindi naman sa pag-aano ha. Dapat ito malaman natin lahat. Alam mo, dapat tayo magpasalamat yan. Sapagkat ang China, unang-una, pumirma dyan sa UNCLOS na yan. Bagamat pumirma siya sa UNCLOS yan, ibig sabihin, committed siya sa agreement na yan. Kung anong pinag-usapan dyan. Ang Pilipinas, pumirma din dyan. Ang problema nila, ang Pilipinas, hindi pa pinatutupad dyan. Katulad na libawa, sinasabi ko. Ang 60-40 agreement, sasabihin ng China, i-implement ko yan. Alam mo ang problema dyan? Paano kung sinabi ng China sa atin, wala naman sa lugar ninyo, wala naman sa territory ninyo, paano yan? Wala naman sa area ninyo yan. Yan ang siya naging question yan. Kasi nga, marami nagpo-question na yung 60-40 agreement niya. But we are practically giving away a portion of what belongs to this country. Sa teritoryo ng Pilipinas yan. Sa bahagi ng Pilipinas. Actually, questionable yan. Hindi nasa teritoryo ito. Kung pag-uusapan natin yung red bank na yan, yung lugar na yan na pinaglalagyan niya ng balampaya na halos maubos na ang laman. Kung yan ang pagbabasihan mo, hindi mo masasabi na sa Pilipinas yan. Disputable yan. At ang China naman, babalik tayo naman sa part side ng China. Kung sasabihin mo naman, kung pumayag ang China na bigay sa atin ng 60-40, hindi ba pabor na pabor sa kanila yan? Pabor na pabor sa atin yun? Pinapapayag na sila mamigay sa atin sa isang area na kini-question nila na atin yan. Sasabihin nila, atin yan eh, belongs to us. Bakit gano'n? Gano'n na nangyari doon. And yet, sabi nila na hindi rin pwede. Yan ang area niya. Kasi hindi may clarify ang dispute niya kung nasaan tayo nagkakaliwanagan. Ngayon, yung pagkatapos niya, ang problema niya sa lugar niya, lalong lumalala kasi nga, una-una, na-discover na yung tinatawag ng hydrocarbon na yan, yung gas. Siyempre, nagkakarami ng interest sa tumataas ang presyo niyan. Siyempre, pag tumataas ang presyo, mas malala ang interest nila. Yun ang mga hinihingi nila na So, my friend, instead, I will submit my paper. I will submit my paper for the audience to read this. Kasi napakahaba nito. I'm trying to. Ngayon, going back na sinasabi ko, yung South China Sea, napakahaba niya, kagaya na sinabi kanina. Galing pa sa North yan, sa Sea of Japan. Doon sa Sea of Japan, ang gulo niya, nagsisimula ang Sigalot pala, hindi naman gulo. Ang Sigalot niya, nagsimula pa sa labanan ng Japan at saka ng tinatawag yung Vladivostok, yung Kurilis Island. Yung Kurilis Island, nung panahon ng digmaan, sinakop yan ng Russia, yung lugar na Kurilis Island. At sa ngayon, binabawi ng Japan yan. Sabi ng Japan, hindi namin binabawi yan. Kasi parang alam mo bakit hindi masahuli yan. Kasi nagpapansin ng Russia na kamping-kampi sa Amerikano at ng Japan. At dahil nga dyan, nanganganib sila na pag binigay nila yan, magkakaroon ng security problem sa Vladivostok. Magkakaroon ng security problem ng Russia sa Vladivostok. Ganun naman sa South naman, meron naman issue ng China at saka Japan. Yung tinatawag na Senkaku o Diaoyu Island. Yung Diaoyu Island, isang isla yan na pinag-aari naman na kiniklaim ng China at saka ng Japan. Ang problema, dati hindi naman lumalayan. Yung ginawa ng Japan, pinagdwili ang isla na yan, privatize yan. Ibinigay siya sa privado company. At ang privado company, nagpapalakad yun ng isla na yun. Eh sabi ng China, ba't nagkaganon? Eh kiniklaim namin, amin yung privatize. Ang ginawa ng Japan, noong panahon nung namatay na si Abe, i-privatize niya yung isla na yan. Eh nagka-problema dyan, kaya lumalala yan. Ngayon, hanggang doon sa tinatawag natin Straits of Taiwan, sa South Strait of Taiwan, alalahanin mo, ang boundary lang ng Pilipinas at saka ng Taiwan, yung tinatawag na Basi Island, yung Basi Channel. Yung Basi Channel, nandiyan pa sa Treaty of Paris, nandiyan sa Paris Agreement. Nakasulat yan doon. At saka yung tinatawag na Straits of Taiwan, ang pagitan lang yan, ang pagitan lang ng Taiwan at saka ng Quemoy Island. May mga isla sa pagitan pa ng Taiwan at saka ng Pilipinas. O ng Taiwan at saka ng China, ay tinatawag Quemoy Island. Ang pagitan lang ay halos kulang-kulang na 24 kilometers lang. Alit lang. Kaya, pero hindi naman maintindihan, ba't pinipilit pa ng Amerikano dumaan doon? Eh, sinasabihan na nga sila na hindi na kayo dapat dumadaan dyan kasi kung tutusin, pag ipinagbugtong mo yung dalawa, ang boundary ng Pilipinas at ng China, eh less than 24 kilometers. Pag less than 24 kilometers, mangyayari yan, parang kukulangin ka na sa internet, hindi na magkakaroon ng international waterway yan. Dadaanan na barkong pang international waterway yan. Yun ang naging problema dyan. Eh, pinipilit ng China ng Amerika na makadaan sila na makadaan doon. Yan, nakikita ng China yan, yung pagdaan nila doon. Eh, practically, to taunting, parang inaamon man nila ang China sa area na yan. Ngayon, papunta naman sa South, dyan sa lugar na yan, ng Pilipinas, sa lugar na yan, mayroong mga isla dyan. Yung mga isla na yan, katulad halimbawa ng Paracel Island, tsaka Spratly, originally, nagkaroon ng problema, may malaking problema yan, originally. After the war, yung mga isla na yan, pag-aari yan ng France, pag-aari ng Francis yan. Ang problema, sinabihan ng Japan, nagkaroon ng tinatawag na San Francisco Peace Treaty. Yung San Francisco Peace Treaty, pinatawag ng Amerikano yung mga bansa na laban sa Hapon. At ang Japan mismo, tinawag sila San Francisco, sinabi sa kanila na kailangan mag-usap tayo. Pinagsabi niya mismo ang Japan na ikaw, dapat mo, ang isla na yan, isurrender mo na sa China yan. Hindi isurrender mo ang mga isla na yan sa China. Specific yan sa San Francisco Treaty. Paliwanag yan. Nandun pa nga Pilipinas. Nandun si President Gustavo Macapagal, si Elizalde, si Cinco. Marami mga Pilipino na kasali doon sa usapan na yan. 5 delegado natin doon. Si Romulo, isa na doon. Eh, yung pinasasauli sa Pilipinas, yung isla na yan, ng Amerikano, umangal ang Taiwan. Sabi sa Tali, bakit mo pasasauli sa China? Eh, dapat nandito kami. Nagkaroon rin ng na peace treaty, revision ng tinatawag na Taiwan Peace Treaty. Mga 1 taon lang, less than a year, matapos mangyari. Pinatawag uli yan ng meeting. Nagkaroon rin ng meeting sila para ayusin ang problema. Kasi nagkamali ang Amerikano, pinamigay yung bulat ng isla na hawak natin ng Hapon, pinasusurrender niya sa China. Eh, sabi ko, umawin na tayo, papunta sa China, sa amin yan. Eh, nagkaroon, inayos nila yan. Pero hanggang ngayon, hindi pa ma-resolve yung issue na yan. At yan, lalong-lalo ng Paracel Island, pinagmulaan niya ng gulo. ng, ng China at saka ng Vietnam dahil inaamin nila na kanila yan. Nagkaroon nga ng bakbakan yan. Pero kahit pa paano, naayos din naman nila yan. Kahit pa paano ngayon, medyo manahimik na. Pero naayos din nila ng China yan. Problema dyan, para sa island na yan, malaking-malaki dyan dahil may langis dyan na nakuha. Kiniklaim na ng Vietnam. Ayaw bitawan yan. Sabi naman ng China, kung tutusin, bahagi yan ng Vietnam. Kiniklaim nila yan. Pero katotohanan yan, unresolved issue yan, yung portion na yan. Pero inaayos na nila kasi nag-uusap ba yung dalawa? Maganda naman ang usapan nila ngayon. At ang pagkatapos yan, ang problema naman natin sa South. Southward naman, hanggang doon na papunta na sa Straits of Malacca. Paglagpas dyan, wala nang medyo problema dyan. Doon na lang sa Straits of Malacca. Dahil doon naman, daanan ng balit na waterway, yun na yung dinadaanan ng mga barko galing sa Japan o Pacifico, papunta ng Indian Ocean. Anong problema doon? So, yun lang ang ano doon. 60-40, number one, 60-40 agreement. Going back to that 60-40 agreement. Dapat ayusin ang pagkasundo Pilipinas at China. Ayusin ng China. Ano ba talaga gusto ng Pilipinas? Ang China, ang Pilipinas ba gusto makipag-usap sa China sa pamamagitan ng CNOOC o government to government basis o private to private relationship. Kasi pag laging panalahanin mo, ang Pilipinas at China ay magkaibang sistema. Ang China ay socialism. So state-owned ka na. Most likely, makikipag-usap ka ng state-owned corporation. Makakaharap mo doon sa kanila. Kaya, pag nakipag-negotiate ang PNOC, Philippine National Oil Company, malamang makausap mo si PNOC. At sila dalawa mag-uusap. At kung mayroon may makikialam dyan na privado, secondary na lang yun. Pero ang main signatory doon ay ang China at ang Pilipinas sa pamamagitan ng PNOC. At ang usapan nila lagi doon, tayo naman, dapat ayusin natin yan. On the basis na tinatawag na equity between the Philippines and China. Pag nag-usap tayo sa Vision Constitution, 60-40. Kasi yun ang nakalagay sa ating Constitution. Dapat nasa atin 60-40. That is on the basis, ang 60-40 will apply if the area belongs to the Philippines. Yun ang magiging basis ng 60-40. Pag ang usapan na 60-40, ang area naman ay labas ng Pilipinas, medyo mahihirapan tayo pa-usapin. Pilitin ng 60-40. Mahihirapan tayo. Yun ang sasabi ko. Pero naman, dapat na lang, agreement natin, katulad ng pinag-usapan dati, usapan na, i-define na lang na rin. Nasa lugar yung tinatawag ng service contract. Kasi kaya tinawag ng service contract. May mga area dyan na talaga ina-identify na atin yan. Parang kung sa lote, pinaperaso-peraso yung lugar na yan. May paraperaso yan eh. Binibigyan area na yan. So, pag allocated na sa'yo, may service contract number yan. Number 1. Diba? Yeah. Service contract 280 to...
Hi, Sir, Mr. Kapunan, good afternoon. We may just need to wrap up a little to give time to our next speaker and for the Q&A. Kung kaya po.
Sige. Well, I think hanggang doon lang ang analysis ko. Pwede tatapusin ko na yun. Yun lang nasasabi ko. Sige, thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Rod Kapunan. Appreciated. And we have learned quite a lot especially on our claims and the 60-40 joint exploration, which I think a Q&A will have a lot of questions about that after. No? So can I ask for the introduction of our next speaker?
Professor Celso Cainglet is a vocal academician and public intellectual who is straightforward with his positions in socio-political discourses. As an academician and a public intellectual, he has not only rendered services as a tri-media consultant, editor, and social political analyst with a long list of publications in newspapers, magazines, and scholarly journals, but more importantly, he has been very dynamic with his views mainly where matters of international relations are concerned, such as the issues on the West Philippine Sea. His career and professional life may be described as largely academic, serving as a faculty member in various universities, colleges, and institutes in the country to the present day. Currently, Professor Cainglet is serving as philosophy professor at the University of the Philippines in Visayas. Apart from the academic, his government and consultancy services engagements are equally inspiring. Over the years, he has held important missions in both public and the private sectors, namely as Executive Director of Global Filipinos from 2004 to 2006, as Correspondence Director at the Office of the President of the Republic of the Philippines from 2008 to 2010, and as Senior Analyst and Assistant Editor-in-Chief of the Center for Strategy, Enterprise, and Intelligence, or Sensei e-newspaper, consultant to the Office of the House Speaker of the Philippine Congress from 2019 to 2020, to name a few. Professor Cainglet renders consultancy services for the Committee on National Defense of the Philippine Congress. Given his humble but truly inspiring background and experience, Professor Celso Cainglet is recognized by the Awards for the Promotion of Philippine-China Understanding, or Appcu, for his vocal expression and powerful stance in promoting better ties, understanding, friendship, and cooperation with China as a neighbor in Asia, particularly on issues involving the West Philippine Sea and the eastern parts of the South China Sea. For him, there are valuable lessons to be learned from the experiences of Taiwan and Vietnam, especially where international diplomacy is essential. Accordingly, while there may be disputes on territorial claims, as a nation, Filipinos must not be stopped with this discourse, as there are other aspects that require immediate attention, such as enabling the economy to thrive for the good and benefit of the majority.
Welcome, Professor Cainglet.
Good afternoon, Hubert. Good afternoon, Apcu President Jeffrey Nang and Apcu officers. And of course, to my good friend, Kapunan, good afternoon and happy birthday. I think it's your birthday today. Anyway, what I'll do this afternoon, most of the some of the things I'll mention here, I already mentioned in other forums, but I believe it should be heard again, because what happened, the recent happenings in the South China Sea was the greatest deception ever made to the Filipino people. I'll just highlight some of the incidents because it's a very long story, and I would like to acknowledge Bubi Tiglao for the intensive research. Now, if you want some more details, you can check out his book, Debacle. Okay, so what really happened in the South China Sea? Because during the time of previous presidents, there was really no problem, except during the time of President Ramos, there were some irritants, and Ramos, towing the line of his American masters, would once in a while make some noises. Okay, so what really happened in the South China Sea? It was actually a business interest. There are three groups interested in the hydrocarbon deposits at Reed Bank. Number one, the First Pacific Company, owned by the Indonesian Anthony Salim, who also owns a vast majority share in Felix Mining, a subsidiary of PXP Energy, formerly Felix Petroleum, which owns Forum Energy. Salim's man in the Philippines is Manuel Pangilinan, who owns several companies in the Philippines. Number two, Salim's partner in the Reed Bank project is the casino magnate Enrique Razon. And third, the third group, Roberto Ongpin, who has 20% ownership of Forum Energy. It was Ongpin who led the investors group in 2008 to sell the last tranche of Felix Mining to First Pacific. On February 10, 2009, the Energy Department issued to Forum Energy, a firm of the Salim conglomerate known as the First Pacific Group, service contract number 72, to extract gas and oil in the Reed Bank. In a note verbal, China protested the issuance of Service Contract 72. A similar protest was issued on May 13. When Benigno Aquino III became president in 2010, he appointed Salim conglomerate executive Albert Del Rosario as Foreign Affairs Secretary. On February 30, 2011, Forum Energy dispatched seismic survey vessels MV Veritas Voyager to the Reed Bank in the Spratlys. On March 2, 2011, China civilian CMS, Civilian Marine Surveillance Vessel, blocked Forum's vessel, saying that it did not have the authority to explore for gas and oil in the area. On July 25, 2011, Aquino, in his second State of the Nation address, ranted against China for blocking the Forum Energy vessel and claimed what is ours, and announced his plan to file a case in the International Tribunal for the Laws of the Sea, or ITLOS. According to Bubi Tiglao, what triggered the tension between the two countries was China's driving away from the Reed Bank on March 2, 2011, of an oligarchic trio vessel, MV Veritas Voyager. Aquino was implacably livid about the incident, as if he had a personal stake at it. The Aquino regime concealed the involvement of that private consortium in the Reed Bank incident. It lied to the Filipinos, saying it was Scarborough Shoal standoff from April 10 to June 2012, and the resultant loss of the shoal that triggered its filing of arbitration case against China. The original plan was to file a complaint at the International Tribunal for the Laws of the Sea, but was cancelled upon the advice of the international law firm Foley Wag, for it involved sovereignty claim and it will be surely tossed out by ITLOS, for it cannot be resolved by UNCLOS or any international court. The law firm instead advised that it be packaged as an arbitration case on maritime entitlement and not on sovereign disputes. During the height of the tension, China was willing to discuss diplomatically with the Philippines in a bilateral dialogue. But the Philippines, upon the advice of Foreign Affairs Secretary Albert Del Rosario, who obeyed his American masters, insisted on a multilateral talk involving the United States of America. China refused a multilateral discussion. Why did America wanted to join the fray? As Asians, when there is conflict with our neighbors, as much as possible, we avoid going to court. We settle it among ourselves, or we call uncle to mediate on the settlement. The Aquino administration brought the matter to the Permanent Court of Arbitration at The Hague. China did not participate in the arbitration, so technically there was no arbitration that took place. The arbitration panel ruled in favor of the Philippines. Expectedly, since the private court of arbitration is a private company, it was paid a huge amount of money by the Philippine government, amounting to almost 1 billion or more than 1 billion pesos for the arbitration proceedings, and expectedly will rule in favor of its client. If you read the decision closely, it does not tell China to do anything. Technically, the PCA cannot make such ruling, but the Aquino administration, through its mouthpiece, then Associate Justice Antonio Carpio, made it appear that the PCA was a UN body and the ruling was a victory for the Philippines. They lied again. The Department of Foreign Affairs hired a Washington-based NGO, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, alleged to be a CIA front to help strategize the countries dealing with China. It was the CSIS who crafted the media operations to denounce China, to make China appear as a bully who grabbed Philippine territory. They launched a well-oiled media machinery tapping mainstream media outlets and new media outfits such as Rappler, Verifiles, and so on. The National Endowment for Democracy is one of the funders of the operation. Of course, we know that NED is owned by George Soros, and money came from George Soros. They harp on the Filipinos Cinderella complex. That is, the feeling of Filipinos as underdogs being bullied by the rich and the powerful. Filipinos have already primordial xenophobia inculcated by the Spanish colonizers. The Spaniards then were threatened by the progress of Chinese traders that they drilled into the minds of the Filipinos that the Chinese cannot be trusted. Aquino took the cudgel for the triad's business interests, putting the nation in jeopardy not only in the possibility of war with China, but endangering its economy, since China is a major trading partner. Aquino's minions, DFA Secretary Albert de Rosario, who apparently had the interest of his boss Anthony Salim in mind, and then Defense Secretary Voltaire Gasmin, frequently made a trip to Washington begging for American assistance in the South China Sea conflict. The Americans would make great promises, citing for the Mutual Defense Treaty of 1951, but at the end of the day would advise them to settle matters with China diplomatically. Way back in the 60s, the Philippines almost went to war with Malaysia over the Sabah claim, and the Americans categorically denied assistance. During his presidency, President Fidel Ramos went to U.S. Ambassador John Negroponte, seeking assistance from the U.S. on the intrusion of Chinese vessel at Spratlys, but was advised to settle the matter with China himself. The U.S. State Department already made it clear that the Mutual Defense Agreement does not cover territories under dispute. Aquino's passionate ranting for the sake of the oligarchic triad formed assumptions that he may have a stake in one of the companies. There were allegations that his family had a stake in the project which would generate billions of dollars from the hydrocarbon deposit at Reed Bank. Now, I'll never use West Philippine Sea again because it does not exist. Why? On October 29, 2012, Aquino issued Administrative Order 29 of 2012, naming as West Philippine Sea the western side of the Philippine archipelago, the Luzon Sea, and the waters within adjacent to the Kalayaan Island Group, and Bajo de Masinloc, also known as Scarborough Shoal. The Kalayaan Island Group has long been claimed by China many decades before the Philippines called it Kalayaan Island Group in 1978. Aquino urged government apparatus to use the name West Philippine Sea when referring to the South China Sea. Aquino did not submit any requests or arguments to the International Hydrographic Organization to rename this portion of the Pacific Ocean into West Philippine Sea. Up to this day, there is no record in the International Hydrographic Organization of West Philippine Sea. Hence, it does not exist and has no international recognition. One of Aquino's ardent supporters in Congress, Waldin Bello, was the one who proposed the name West Philippine Sea in 2011. He filed a resolution to the House Committee on Foreign Affairs to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on renaming the South China Sea to the West Philippine Sea. However, the committee sat on the resolution knowing that the name would take an act of Congress, knowing that the name change would take an act of Congress or even a plebiscite. Yet, Aquino went ahead renaming the South China Sea into West Philippine Sea with his battle cry, "What is ours is ours." That is absurd and even funny because of the 16th century doctrine that the sea is the common heritage of mankind. In other words, nobody owns the sea. Okay? But the sea is the common heritage of mankind. In the words of Bubi Tiglao, yet the very term created by Aquino provokes irrational and emotional sentiments strengthening the wrong belief that since it is named after the Philippines, it must be owned by the Philippines, and that China and the others have no business being there. The Chinese did not name it South China Sea, but the Europeans did in the 16th century. Okay? So I just exposed the business interests that really started the scuffle. No? Then where do we go from here? One thing we have to understand about Chinese diplomacy is that there is an official and an unofficial level. For example, officially there is a dispute with Vietnam, but unofficially trading between China and Vietnam is very robust, and 90% of oil exploration in Vietnam are joint ventures with China. The same can be said with Taiwan. In the surface, there's a brewing tension, but on the ground, trading is very much alive. When President Marcos Sr. visited China in 1975, he brought up the territorial dispute with then Vice Premier Deng Xiaoping. Deng told him to set the issue aside and that maybe the future generations will have more wisdom how to deal with it. Meanwhile, let us do business. This is according to the account of Estelito Mendoza, who was with the party. The late Ambassador Alberto Encomienda, a maritime law expert par excellence, and former head of the Maritime and Ocean Affairs Center for the Department of Foreign Affairs and founder and president of Balik Balangay, an NGO on maritime concerns, had been advocating that instead of highlighting the territorial dispute, the Philippines and China and other ASEAN countries should instead focus on maritime cooperation, environmental and security protection, and economic development in the region. I believe that this is the correct direction in the South China Sea. And personally, I believe, this concept of territory or late 18th century construct in a globalized world, they are being is out. So we have to stop thinking about nationalism, about territory. If you look at the earth, no political boundaries exist, but we are all members of the humankind. Okay. Meanwhile, America media apparatus headed by the Center for International Strategic Studies and the Albert Del Rosario Foundation, or ADRI, continue to aggressively spread false information and agitations on the South China Sea issue, especially now that the US is negotiating for 5 more EDCA bases in the Philippines. They are fabricating false and imagined threats of China in the region. As a student of philosophy, I belong to the Frankfurt School. The Frankfurt School is considered as the son of Karl Marx, with deviation, of course, and a grandchild of Sigmund Freud. The Frankfurt School applied Freudian psychoanalysis in their social analysis. They believed that many of the social psychoses were due to the suppressed meanings and rationalizations. Hence, the prescription for the ideal speech situation in the public sphere. The public sphere is essential in exposing intention and diffusing tensions. This forum now is an example of the public sphere. Hence, thank you, Apcu, for a forum like this, where I hope that by exposing the truth and the sinister intentions of an interest group, it will lose steam. I said it several times already, and I will say it again. There is a shift of prosperity from the west to the east. Asia's time has come. Instead of dwelling on conflict of what is ours, which is incorrect after all, let us instead work for peace, progress, and prosperity. Thank you very much.
All right. So thank you, Mr. Kapunan, and thank you, Professor Cainglet, for your talks. And we have learned quite a bit from what you have shared. So we'll move on to our Q&A. So Mr. Kapunan, are you there? So if you are there, you can open your mic and open your video so that we can tackle some questions. Of course, some questions from the floor. Please type your questions on the chat box if you have questions. Some, of course, if you do not wish to type, you can text me. I'll post my number here. My number is 0917-570-0119. So that said, let me type my number. Otherwise, please type your question in the chat box. Anyway, let me start by asking both of our speakers this question. The first is regarding the current US and China geopolitical contest. And there's been a renewed interest in between the certain segments of the Philippine government and of course the US government to revive the EDCA and have a couple of new bases. So briefly, can you mention your thoughts on whether you think this can prosper under the current administration? As we know, the previous administration was very much against the EDCA, but the Pinoy administration was and the Duterte administration was not. So can you share your thoughts briefly on the EDCA and whether you think this will push through under Marcos administration? And of course, its impact on a possible war in Taiwan. So first, Mr. Kapunan, then Professor Cainglet.
First, I don't understand what Ambassador Laureate said. He said specifically that the Philippines intend to have these bases leased to Taiwan. I don't know. Because the original agreement we entered into with China was the recognition of the one China policy. That means we will not allow China to interfere or to use any of the bases here as rent from the Republic of the Philippines or using as front American military bases stationed here in the Philippines. We cannot do that. I don't understand why Romales insists in extending the jurisdiction of the bases to include Taiwan. Definitely, the original agreement, we cannot, based on any agreement, we cannot extend the lease of our own bases to foreign countries, specifically to parties not a party to our agreement. Say, for instance, if we are a party to the ASEAN or to the Southeast Asian Treaty Organization, we cannot listen to other countries like Korea, which is not a member of CETO, or to Pakistan, which is not a member of the organization. We can only lease the bases if the lessor is part of the alliance. So, halimbawa, ipapapalis lang natin ang Clark at saka Subic sa Amerikano. At ang Amerikano naman, mapapagamit lang yan. Mapapagamit lang yan. That is, with the permission of the Philippines, sa isang bansa na kaalyado ng Pilipinas. So, halimbawa, yung Clark at saka Subic, hindi pwede iparinta ng Pilipinas sa Taiwan. Kasi ang Taiwan, hindi natin kasama yun. Hindi kasama sa usapin yan. At ang Clark, ginawa, hindi para sa kanila. Ginawa yan para sa depensa ng Pilipinas. In fact, Clark and Subic was primarily established to defend the Republic of the Philippines, not to defend the interest of Taiwan. Yun dapat maging maliwanag yan kay Romales. Yun lang.
Professor?
Okay, we have a forum this several days ago in Kamuning Pandesal Forum, where I was one of the reactors, the main speakers, Saludo. And the additional of 5 more EDCA bases, even again, it's Ukraine all over again. No? That they will stockpile all their weapons here, their bases here, and further souring the relationship with China. I'm against it, but in theology we have what we say, reading the sign of the times. No? And the way I read the sign of the times, I think this EDCA basis will push through. What are the sign of the times? Of course, the pronouncement of the present Secretary of Foreign Affairs, the OIC of the Department of National Defense, and of course our ambassador to the United States. In fact, I cannot understand, and I'm disappointed that it seems that BBM, this is just according to my reading, I may be wrong, is gravitating towards the Americans. In fact, I mentioned in that forum, if you're familiar with the book of John Perkins, The Confession of an Economic Hitman, every time there's a new leader, this economic hitman will approach them and will offer them sticks and carrots. I don't know if that happened or what were offered, that it seems that the present president is gravitating towards China. I hope we will just maintain the independence foreign policy of President Duterte. Now, what many suggest is for BBM to call for a National Security Council meeting, including the former presidents. If that happens, President Duterte will be there, President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo will be there, President Eric Estrada will be there, and we know that these presidents are not really very fond of the US. You know? I hope that happens, and there's still time to stop this, because we cannot get involved in the tantrums of America, because America is a dying civilization, and like a dying man, it will bite and scratch just to hold on to their life, and that's what I'm afraid of. It will really go to war just to hold on to its hegemony in this emerging multipolar world.
And in addition to this, does it necessitate Congress to pass the EDCA, or is act of the president and its cabinet enough for EDCA to push through?
Well, EDCA was signed by Voltaire Gasmin and by then U.S. ambassador, no? And I think the Supreme, the question, the constitutionality of it, I'm not sure with my facts, but I think the Supreme Court already considered it as a constitutional. However, it was an executive agreement. As such, it can also be rescinded by the executive. No need to involve Congress. The president can rescind it anytime because it's just an executive agreement.
Okay. Follow-up question on the South China Sea. There has been talks since the Duterte administration of a code of conduct between the South China Sea claimants and ASEAN in particular and China. And since then, up to now, people have been talking about it. ASEAN has been talking about, China has been talking about it, but it seems that it still cannot get done. Do you think that it is just a good for show, or do you think that there could be progress on a declaration of a code of conduct in the South China Sea?
Well, let me explain that. The code of conduct actually is what we call the application of what we call the rules-based principles applied by the United States. That is, the rules of conduct means that they will have a right to patrol. Let me use the word to patrol the entire South China Sea. Pag nagpapatrol ka sa area na yan, medyo it's something that either you're taunting your position against China in a war, in an attempt to create a war with the country, or to militarize the area. That is to prevent other countries from entering into that area, like the Straits of Taiwan. Hindi sila magkukontrol yan. Yan ang patrol na sinasabi ko. Dapat silang hindi dapat tinatolerate yan. Because ang patrol lang sa Straits of Taiwan hanggang ngayon, tinatanong ng marami yan, what for? Ba't magparoon patrol? Ba't dagkandaan dyan? Ano ba naman sa katulad na ba ng ginagawa ng US Navy sa tinatawag na Straits of Taiwan? Dahil sila nandun, bakit ba? At ang pinakamasaklap dyan, doon sa Straits of Taiwan, may mga bansa dyan na kung daan, hindi naman tigar yan, katulad ng mga Japan, Korea, Australia, tulad ng mga itong India, pati na India sumasali dyan, gusto na dumaan sa lugar na yan. Ang China, naiirita dyan. Ba't ka nandaan dyan? Nakakairita yan sa ibang bansa. Kasi parang hinahamon ng China yan. Yan ang dahilan. Bakit hindi na pwede ino-objectan yung tinatawag na patrol na yan? Kasi hindi yan eh. Privado ng lugar. Wala hindi na. Kung tutuslo, i-apply mo sinabi ko kanina, international, hindi na mag-apply dyan dahil makitid na masyado yung daan na yan para maging international waterway yan. That's what I mean.
I agree with my good friend Kaarod. You know? On the one hand, I would subscribe, or I would push for the code of conduct to rationalize the system here in the Pacific. On the other hand, the problem with the code of conduct is going through rough waters is because of the interference of the Americans. That as what Carol said, that they want to participate. I find it absurd. America is a signatory to the UNCLOS, but up to this day, they have not ratified it. And yet, they're the ones who is noisy when it comes to freedom of navigation. No? In the first place, what are they doing here? It's very, very far. In fact, they even want the Coast Guard to participate in the patrolling here, which is tricky. Because Coast Guard all over the world is civilian. That's why we transferred our Coast Guard to the Department of Transportation. Because in international relations, if your Coast Guard is military, then you send your Coast Guard to rescue a ship in distress in territorial water. It is an act of war. Like this China issue, we actually declared war against China when we sent the Navy vessel to the disputed waters. Ano ba yun? Aguinaldo ba yun?
Gregorio
Del
del Pilar.
Del Pilar. That was an act of war. But China was very tolerant. It was an act of war declared by the Philippines against China when we sent Gregorio del Pilar, the Philippine Navy.
Yeah. So there seems to be a misconception in the Philippines, in particular, that China is the one, but that we are claiming against. But in truth, it is not only China; it is Vietnam also and Malaysia. Correct?
Yes, Hubert. Mainstream media through their propaganda have been portraying Chinese military vessels, etc. But they're not military. Those are Chinese Coast Guard. They're part of the Five Dragons. Five Dragons are civilian maritime enforcing agencies. They're not Navy. They're not PLA Navy. They are Chinese Coast Guard. They're civilian vessels. But media were portraying them as military vessels. They're not.
Yeah. To expound on this, the South China Sea or Spratly Islands have other claimants, Vietnam being one of them, Malaysia being one of them. And of course, Republic of China also occupies the Aba or the Taiping Island. So I think there seems to be a misconception in the Philippines that we are only up against China when in fact there are other claimants.
That's true, yes.
What do you think should be done to educate more people about this? Because even if umalis yung China, nandyan pa rin naman si Vietnam and Malaysia. What do you guys think?
Now, let me clarify this as well. Alam mo, yung entry ng Malaysia dyan sa South China Sea, alisin mo lang Malaysia doon sa North Borneo. Wala na siyang lugar dyan. Geographically, hindi siya malalagay doon. Kaya nagkaroon siya ng tinatawag na extinction ng kanyang karapatan dyan. Dahil sapagkat siyang nakatungkod dyan, siya nakatero tayo na dyan sa North Borneo. Pag-aari, kililingan ng kanila yan. Ang mga islang karuntong yan, in-extend na niya from North Borneo. Yung mga islang karating dyan, nakatawin na. At ang ibang mga isla dyan, ay inagaw na nila sa Pilipinas. Kinuha na sa Pilipinas. Alam yan eh. You erase, for instance, the entire map of Malaysia from North Borneo, it will have no place in the South China Sea. Walang lugar yan doon eh. At hindi natin nakikita. Kaya nandun yan dahil nga lang because of their incursions in the south of North Borneo. Sila inari nila yung North Borneo from there. Tumawid sila yung mga isla na kanila sila inangkin na nila. Ganun ang simula nun. Ang Vietnam naman, pero historically, kanila naman yun. At yan naman, binigay ng Second World War, after the war, sa Hapon, dahil inagaw ng Hapon yan sa France. Inagaw ng France yan. Tapos, binigay sa kanila yan. Pinasauli yan ng Amerikano sa China yan. Ang problema, nung sinauli sa China, may pumalag ang Taiwan. Sabi ko kanina, sabi ng Taiwan, ba't mo bibigay mo sa Japan yan? Amin yan. Ganon ang problema doon. Kaya nagkaroon ulit ng meeting dyan.
You know, Hubert, Filipinos have a very, very poor sense of geography. I remember when I asked my students, Rizal was exiled in Dapitan, and I asked them, "What is Dapitan?" And many of them answered Sampaloc. Anyway, like for example, this Reed Bank, this Calayan Island Group, this Scarborough. So it's a very, very vast area. It's very far from each other. But what media is doing, they're over generalizing that a spark would be created in one area. They would generalize that everything is South China Sea. Yes, I believe though. In fact, way back in the 70s, Vietnam grabbed Phuket Island, which is really ours. No? At that time, it's an island. Because many of the features there are just rocks, and it cannot support human life. And if it cannot support human life, it cannot generate the 12 nautical mile territorial water. But there was no fuss about it. That was a violent grabbing. Actually, it's not a violent grabbing. It was a funny grabbing because the Marines there were invited to a party. Then when they went back, the Vietnamese were already there. My position always, Hubert, is that let us get rid our consciousness of this territory, of this island. Instead, let us look at these Pacific waters as an area of cooperation and development, instead of what is ours, because the sea is the common heritage of mankind.
So moving on to one of the questions before I move on to bigger geopolitics issues, no? On the issue of joint exploration of the resources in the Recto Bank, in Spratly Islands or whatnot, no? And as far as my understanding is, currently we have a Malampaya, which is 90%. Shell and Chevron before, now sold to Dennis Uy, then eventually sold to Mr. Razon. And the other one is the one where the MVP group or Felix or First Pacific has a service contract but has not yet been explored. And China is offering with CNOOC 60-40, 60% Philippines and 40% China. And the Philippines thus far has refused to acknowledge. Is that a correct understanding? And if so, what is this necessary to move forward? Do you think China, if ever, okay, we agree, will China abide by 60-40 Philippines in favor of Philippines? And do you think that once signed a certain, let's say BBM administration signs it, the next administration cannot just void it? What's your opinion on that? And what's the possible road? Who is the roadblock? Is it the Philippines? Is it China? Is it the president? Is it the Congress?
Let me clarify that. A service contract can only be given by the state to a private contractor. It cannot be transferred to anybody. Hindi mo pwede ibigay. Halimbawa, ang service contract na isang lugar i-exploit, i-develop ng Shell o kaya Chevron, hindi pwede bigyan ng share ng Chevron sa halimbawa sa Phoenix, ano pa yun sa oil company ang kasali dyan kay Wheaties o kaya
Forum Energy or
Forum Energy.
PXP naman yun.
PXP, then Forum Energy.
Pag lalo na pagbili, hindi mo pwede pagbili yan. Dapat yan, pinapaalam mo sa gobyerno kasi ang granting ay state. Ang nagbigay sa ng gobyerno, hindi nagbigay ng privado. Ang ginagawa natin, kaya nagkakaproblema yan. Kaya nga, sabi ko nga, ang China, napapagbintangan niya na parang pumapalag sa usapan. Parang sa Tagalog, parang baga hindi mahirap ang kausap. Hindi maintindihan kung anong gusto natin. Halimbawa, ipagbili na, nalaman natin na pinagbili na ng Shell at ng Chevron yung ikat ng CS sa Balampaya. Tapos napunta sabi natin punta Kiwi. Paano mangyari yun? Samantala, generally, dapat pinapaalam sa atin yan. In like manner, na ang China, nakikipag-usap tayo sa China, lalo na sa CNOC, para ma-exploit yung lugar na yan. Malaman-laman natin, ang kausap pala ng CNOC, hindi PNOC, ang kausap na yung mga ibang pribado korporasyon. Ano mangyari? Kaya nagkakagulo yan eh. Hindi natin i-clarify ano gusto natin. Yun lang ang masasabi ko dyan.
Actually, Carol, there was a point in time that China did not want to talk with this private corporation, but it should be PNOC. And after that, Carpio et al., the whole caboodle made noises again. Anyway, Hubert, I'm not an economist, I'm not a lawyer, but definitely, the problem here is the Philippines. China is handling to us this joint venture in a silver platter. We didn't even complain that in Malampaya, the Philippines is only getting, if you do the math, is only getting 10%. But here, China will over that 60-40. So definitely, the way I see it, the Philippines is the problem here.
By the way,
Right.
may dagdag ko lang yan. Hindi na actually 10% na naitira sa atin. Alam mo, ang napunta sa atin mga something like 3% na lang. Kasi tayo pa pinagbayad ng buwis. Hindi naman nagbayad ng dalawang yung Sierra at yung Chevron. Hindi sila nagbayad ng buwis. Ipinasa sa atin at nagbayad ng PNOC. Practically, libre-libre sila lahat. Napakasaya nila. Katapos ngayon, nung malaman nila na medyo pawala na ng laman doon sa Malampaya, ng natural gas, ipinagbili nila. Balita ko, pinagbili na kay Dennis yan.
Dennis Uy first, then I think kay Mr. Razon, I think.
Grabe, granting na lang na pinagbilihan niya kay Minister So. Ang tanong na, hindi dapat ginawa nila yun. Kasi dapat, ang grantee, hindi si Dennis Uy, o hindi rin ang Chevron o Shell. Ang grantee mismo ang PNOC. Yung Estado mismo kasi ang China, nagkikipag-usap tayo sa China, ang sinasabi ng China, kausapin yung CNOC namin. Hindi naman sinasabi ng China, kausapin mo si Xi Jinping. Kausapin mo ito. Usap kayong dalawa kasi kayong dalawa magka-level eh. Tapos kakausapin mo ang CNOC, tapos malaman-laman ng CNOC, ang kausap mo pala yung ganitong kumpanya na to. Hindi pwede, magkakaroon tayo ng problema dyan.
Yeah, so it seems like private sector interests are are involving themselves in something that should be matters of the state. Noted. So a couple of other questions so related. So first is about Taiwan, and it seems to be the most critical flashpoint in geopolitics nowadays. Noting that, of course, there's a current conflict between Russia and Ukraine where NATO is involved. And then the only possible red line that China has put is Taiwan. If Taiwan were to declare independence and the US were to be on Taiwan's side. So, and of course, the EDCA is of course also in reference to a possible conflict in Taiwan. Otherwise, I don't see the US going to conflict over the islands. So, ano po ang tingin nyo? What do you guys think of Taiwan as the flashpoint? Do you think that there will be a conflict within the next 5 years? And what do you think the Philippines should do in case there is a conflict between Philippines and Taiwan?
Well, as I said, America is a dying country and it's bankrupt as it once was. But there are signs of hope in Taiwan. This so-called reconciliation movement that there are groups in Taiwan who want to reconcile with China. They want to go back to the mainland China, and it's gaining followers. What the Philippines should do? First of all, we should rescind EDCA. Any military tactician would tell you that you don't have to wait for military build-up before attacking a country. You attack a country while it's still building up or while it's still weak. So the more EDCA bases, the stronger will be the American bases power here in the Philippines. No? And Taiwan should learn from the experience of Ukraine. Look at Ukraine. They were promised the sky, the star, the moon above. And when conflict erupted, they were abandoned. Taiwan should learn from that.
Mr. Kapunan, any comment on Taiwan?
So, yung masasabi ko yan, at any time, Taiwan will take in. Ang pinagmamalaki ng chip mo na chip export nila, how do you call that?
Semiconductors.
Semiconductor. Inaano na ngayon na discover na ng China. China can now produce the same semiconductors. Mas advanced pa ang technology ng China dyan. Paano pag na-develop nila yan? Pag na-develop yan, Taiwan will kay, matutunaw yan, wala yan. Ang negosyo, mawawala yan. At ang pinakamaganda ginagawa ng China, China is inviting many Taiwanese businessmen to immigrate to China. Doon kayo sa China magtrabaho, mauubos yan. At ang pinakamasaklap, hindi rin sila kalimutan na ng Amerika mapupunta sa Amerika yung mga Taiwanese na yan. Hindi mapupunta sa Amerika. Unang-unang bahalang pera nila masyado. Walang pupunta sa kanila sa Amerika. Pupunta ka sa Taiwan, papakamatay ka. Punta ka na lang sa China, napakamura, kapit malapit lang sa'yo. At habang malapit ka sa China, malapit ang export dyan. At kakawin mo sa Amerika.
I'll just add, no? After that Pelosi visit to Taiwan, China really flexes its muscle, not militarily, but economically. It will really affect Taiwan.
Correct.
Now between the promises of the Americans and the basic need of the Taiwanese of food, clothing, shelter, I think they will prioritize their basic needs, which China will hit terribly. In fact, I think it was in 2009 when China collapsed the Shanghai stock market, and the whole stock market of the world also got affected. It only shows that it only shows the economic power of China and what they can do. They can cripple Taiwan economically.
All right. Are there any other questions from the floor? Feel free to type it in the chat. There are a couple more questions that maybe 2 or 3 more that I will ask. First is on China internal politics after the National Party Congress. In turn, the US also has its own politics with Biden and the midterm election, and the Republicans having some showing but not a full blast showing. What do you think will happen? And of course, there's this G20 summit. Do you think that anything will happen in the South China Sea over the next because of these developments, or is it just business as usual?
Well, President Xi always talks about socialism with Chinese characteristics. One thing with the government of China, in the Politburo, when they debate, they really debate to the point of almost choking each other. But the moment they can come up with a consensus, the whole bureaucracy follows. And Xi Jinping is a leading figure. And again, reading the sign of the times, the way I read Xi Jinping, he has been calm. In fact, there is a Chinese philosophy in Taoism called Wei Wu Wei. Wei Wu Wei means doing something by doing nothing. It seems to be a passive non-resistance. It seems China is giving the West, especially America, rope long enough to hang themselves, especially with their own internal squabbles right now. A lot of people in Congress are questioning the mental health of Biden, his sanity. Is he still mentally fit to govern the United States? And the troubling scenario that I've seen recently, in the recent midterm election, the Republicans got the majority seats. If I'm not wrong, actually,
in the House. I think in the Senate, not.
No, but even in the House, I think I don't know if I'm correct. Only two seats, I think. That,
yes.
And the Republicans are known to be international interventionists. They make troubles all over the world, and that's something I'm looking at right now. Where will this Republican Congress be headed?
All right. Okay, and for our last question, what I guess ultimately, as Appcu, we want to know how you think we can foster understanding to prevent these kind of issues, or at least to educate the Filipino people. And what do you both, as Appcu laureates, think about how we can help illuminate the minds of Filipinos regarding the South China Sea and about the underlying issues and not the issues that are being shown in the media? What is the role of Appcu and the Appcu members and Appcu officers in this?
Yes, I said it before already that the challenge for Appcu is to come up with a good communication plan. This forum is a good start, but usually when discussion of the South China Sea issue, the language is very technical and very highfalutin. So we have to bring it down to the level of the people. In fact, Kamentong Laurel, Kaado Paglinawan, Ambassador Encomienda, he was still alive then, Victor Corfupus, we already started a campus tour. We started in Iloilo at the University of San Agustin, and the reception and the perception was very, very good. In fact, students were saying, how come we never heard of that before? You know, so I hope that campus tour will continue. No? So, and most of all, media campaign, no? To comics, radio,
TikTok, baka TikTok,
TikTok, yeah,
Professor,
yes.
TikTok and
Very,
YouTube.
very simple communication media. No? We can reach out to the Filipino people in very simple language. May mga expert dyan eh, how to translate this highfalutin discussion into the level of the discussion on the streets without really watering down the issue. I think that's a challenge for Appcu. Let's work in an area where we have a handle. And I think the area where we have a handle is this, communication.
Mr. Kapunan?
Well, I have nothing to say. I'm just listening.
Yes.
Wala na akong masasabi. I'm just nakikinig na lang ako doon. Pero tama yun. Ang attitude natin dapat i-work out natin kung paano tayo magkakaroon ng peace. Yung attitude natin towards China. Kagaya ng ginagawa ng China. Ang China, ang tinatake na kagandaan, paano makakapag-establish ng bridge with Taiwan? Hindi na inaaway yung Taiwan. Inaakin din ang magkaroon ng peace. Ganun din tayo. Ang problema natin sa going back ng pinag-usapan natin kanina, tungkol sa oil, hindi dapat natin nakipag-usap tayo sa China, pero habang kinakausap natin ang China, iniiba natin ang gusto natin. Ang hindi gusto natin, harap mo, kausapin mo ito, pinapasa natin yung problema natin. Yun ang naging problema natin. Kaya nagiging iba ang mga kausap ng PSC no, sa sa bagay na yan. Yun lang madadagdag ko dyan.
And yeah, as a final note, Professor, no, and Mr. Kapunan, it is good to have voices like yours that have called for moderation and for bridge building. As you know, a lot of the media that we have amplifies voices of conflict, especially tied to the certain economic interests that you mentioned, Professor Cainglet. A lot of our media are owned by these companies. So it is worth noting that we thank the Manila Times for, of course, for giving us a good exposure on this. And with that, we will close the forum. Can I ask then Chairman Raul Lambino to give closing remarks. Before then, we would like to call attention to our membership meeting this November 25, 2022. There will be an election and year-end party. It will be in Astoria. It will be in Astoria Plaza, care of President Jeff Nang. And we look forward to seeing everyone there, those who are available. Please sign up so that the hosts can get an idea how many people are attending. So thank you, of course, to our esteemed speakers, Mr. Rod Kapunan and Professor Celso Cainglet. And then, can I ask our chairman to give his closing remarks? Chairman Lambino.
Thank you, Hubert, for hosting this forum today. You have done a very intelligent job, and we thank you for giving time for Appcu. I would like also to thank our two illustrious and prominent speakers, both my good friends, Rod Kapunan and Celso Cainglet. They are not just very efficient and effective speakers or communicators. They are really very experts in the respective fields, more particularly on the issue about China and the Philippines. I just would like to add, and I would like also to thank President continuously there and supporting the Appcu forum that we are holding monthly. I would like to add to what Mr. Kapunan and Mr. Cainglet have mentioned about the issue of the South China Sea, or mistakenly being propagandized by some groups as West Philippine Sea. Celso Cainglet already mentioned that there is no legal basis of calling this area as West Philippine Sea, except only in the context of Philippine domestic consumption. But in international law, such matter doesn't actually exist. No, and I also add about a few thoughts regarding the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. The Treaty of Paris was mentioned as a source document of possible claim of the Philippines of its territory, which treaty was signed between the United States and Spain. And in the UNCLOS, which was signed in 1984, the Philippines was a signatory. We have ratified this. China has signed this and ratified it. The United States has signed it, but it has not ratified it. The reason behind the US not having ratified the same was because of the objection of one of the provisions regarding the exploration of the seabed, which the president then said that it would be not to the best interest of the United States if it's going to be bound by the provision of the UNCLOS as far as that particular issue is concerned. So what then would be the role of the United States in trying to interfere in regard to disputes pertaining to the provision on the UNCLOS? Well, it's always citing customary international law, etc., etc. I fully agree with the opinion that it has been given by Celso here with regard to how we are going to deal with this very hot issue pertaining to the development or exploration or exploitation or the use of the South China Sea. I fully agree that the sea is for all the humanity. There is not supposed to be boundaries among nations already, because the earth has been proven to be very small for the whole mankind. Given we are still bound by customary international law, we are bound by international agreements, we are bound by treaties like the UNCLOS. Now, in the UNCLOS, it's very specific that when you talk of what could be the rights available to states like China and the Philippines, we have what we call the sovereignty. We have what we call exercise of sovereignty. We have also what we call just mere sovereign rights, but not sovereignty. Now, when you talk of territory of a particular state, we are still governed by the so-called the 12 nautical mile rule, or the 12-mile limit. That would be 12 nautical miles from the low water mark. Then you measure going towards the sea. That would be the territory of a particular state, coastal state like the Philippines and China. And inside the territory, then the state exercise sovereignty, full sovereignty. Beyond that, then we have the contiguous zone. And then beyond that, we have another, the exclusive economic zone. In the exclusive economic zone, we do not have sovereignty. We only have sovereign rights, but not sovereignty. So we cannot claim actually any territorial rights over this parcel of islands that are being disputed by China, Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, and others who are claiming to have a say in regard to these particular areas in the Spratlys or in South China Sea, except, as mentioned by Celso, if the particular island can be a source of life. But if it's not, then it's just a mere rock, nothing. And so what could be the reason why there are some interests by claimant countries and by some private entities? It is more an issue of economics. It's more issue of wealth, resources that are available, not just the fisheries that are abound in the area, but of course, mineral or possibly even the non-mineral resources that are essential to the economic development of the nations that are claiming to have rights over these areas, like China and that of the Philippines. There was also mention about EDCA, expansion of this EDCA, this executive agreement that was entered into between the Philippines and the United States. I hope that the present administration will have to study this very, very carefully, given the realities that are happening now all over the world. And we are certain that China is not going to just keep silent about the activities that would be undertaken in the area here in the Philippines or in South China Sea by a military superpower like the United States. Expanding its military might in the region would not be for the interest of the Philippines or of the ASEAN in a bigger perspective. So the present Philippine administration will have to consider and study very carefully what action will the government do in order to protect the interests of the nation as well as, of course, of every Filipino. You mentioned also about what are we supposed to do with regard to the issue on Taiwan in the event that Taiwan will possibly declare independence from China. I hope that's not going to happen. That's not going to be considered. For sure, China will never allow that situation to arise. And all these are possibilities. These are contingencies that may or may not happen. So we are hopeful that the Philippine government has its own contingency plans for all the possibilities that may arise given the very volatile security situation now, not just in our region, but also that of Europe now. There is a bigger issue, though, that is also tied with our national security, and of course about the issue on South China Sea. The issue on the supply of foods, supply of other essentials, more particularly oil and gas. Everybody knows how the whole world is suffering from COVID-19 pandemic. We are now suffering from another big blow that has been the result of the Ukraine-Russia war that disrupted the supply chain. There is now inflation all over the world, and the availability of food is very crucial. Here in the Philippines, I can say that one of the most important, if not the most important commodity is rice. And given the last harvest that took place very recently, as we are still harvesting some of the rice that have been planted by our poor farmers, we have not produced that much stocks or that much food that would be needed by our nation and people. So we hope that we can still buy from the producing countries like Thailand and Vietnam. I am afraid that the situation therein is likewise not as good as it was 2-3 years ago because of the disruption of the supply chain, and the cost of farm inputs has greatly affected the production of Thailand and Vietnam, the two main producers of rice and exporters at that, where the Philippines has been a recipient of these products being bought by us for the last 20 years. So this matter has to be considered also. What would be the relationship of this disruption of the supply chain with the issue of the South China Sea? It's very important because the South China Sea is a very strategic body of water where the supply of foods and other essentials coming from Europe, from the Middle East, or from Japan, from China, going to those parts of the world through the Indian Ocean is a very important waterway. So again, I would like to thank Professor Celso Cainglet and my good friend Rod Kapunan for sharing their views. They have given us a lot of things to ponder and a lot of issues that we have to really take a look at. And I hope that the Philippine government will have to study very carefully all the matters pertaining to our security situation in the country today. And I may reiterate what Hubert has said already regarding the next Assembly Forum, the General Assembly of Appcu and election of the new officers of Appcu will take place on November 25 at Astoria Hotel, courtesy of our President Jeffrey Nang, who's going to host us in that prestigious establishment. So, mabuhay po tayo. Magandang hapon po sa ating lahat.
All right, with that, thank you, Chairman Raul Lambino, and we thank, of course, our speakers, and we look forward to seeing everyone in the next event, and we hope that Appcu can be a bridge, continue to be a bridge for understanding. With that, thank you, and we close this event. Good afternoon to all of you.